Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's jump into today's episode. 3 things to say instead of I'm sorry. Why are women always apologizing or often apologizing? It's amazing how many times it happens and how, for most of us, it's a knee-jerk reaction. And my analysis or assessment based on living in the world is that it's a culturally conditioned thing. And we're so used to doing it, we don't even think about it. And I have to stop myself, even though I teach this stuff and I'm hyper aware of how it can take away from our credibility and frankly is an unnecessary thing to say, unless obviously we've wronged someone, but I still notice myself doing it. So we've all got to watch ourselves. And the more we can get in the habit of replacing it with other things, and I've got 3 suggestions for you that will help us when we can get that muscle memory going, when we continue to practice saying the different thing, then over time, it's going to get better. And it is interesting how many times we say it as a knee-jerk reaction. So I want to start with the number one thing that I have found to turn it into something more productive. And I immediately think of a scenario at the grocery store or when you're shopping somewhere. Maybe you also are shopping at TJ Maxx like me, wherever you are. There's that casual bump into somebody when you're in the aisle, or you have a grocery cart and they have a grocery cart and somehow you're both in the same aisle. It's one of those simple things to simply say, excuse me. Train yourself to say, excuse me instead. Almost all of the time, unless you have wronged someone and you legitimately need to apologize, that works. Now, I'm thinking about a specific scenario where I was in the aisle at TJ Maxx and there were 3 women that had just gotten into the aisle, were trying to navigate, and all 3 said, I'm sorry, right away. Oh, I'm sorry. And seemed very apologetic. Oh, like, I'm so sorry to bother you. And the thing is, why, if anybody's wondering, well, why is it that big of a deal? The thing is, I have so many opinions about this. One of the reasons is because it diminishes who you are as a person over time. If you're constantly saying, I'm sorry, the message that's coming across, probably even more importantly, is coming across to yourself, is that I'm not worthy of being here, or I'm in the way, or I am a bother. My mom, when I was growing up, used to be very involved at her church. She was in charge of various ministries, and oftentimes I would hear her on the phone. And this is the one and most common thing that I heard her say when she was on the phone, when she started the phone call, as she was usually the one calling people for volunteers. I'm sorry to bother you. That was the first thing out of her mouth. And it almost seems as if I'm not worthy of calling you, or why in the world would you want to talk to me? I'm not somebody that you'd even want to spend your time with. And I recognize that I could be overanalyzing this, but I want this to make a point. When we diminish ourselves without even knowing it, then we've put ourselves in a less than powerful position. We're making ourselves smaller. And imagine the difference, because first of all, most people, I'm going to guess, if you're a likable enough person and you're a good person, people probably like you. So you don't have to apologize, for example, for calling or texting or starting with this, I'm sorry to bother you. We need to assume, imagine the difference, that you're calling and you know that they're excited to hear from you. And the difference of how you would feel. And I think about even my mom, if she had instead saying, I'm sorry to bother you. Hey, Joan, it's Florence. How are you doing today? I've got a question for you. What a different experience versus I'm so sorry to bother you. That is in part why we want to avoid saying that. And that's probably honestly one of the biggest reasons why to avoid it, because of all the underlying things that it could say about us. And that we, most importantly, are thinking about ourselves, because all these things are a mindset. And it's going to help you to be more confident. It's also going to help you play bigger in the world. And you're simply going to walk around with just a more groundedness, confidence. That's the best way that I can say it, is confidence. So say excuse me instead of I'm sorry. Try that out. Try that first, to let that be your knee-jerk reaction for the next 21 days. Focus on saying excuse me when you want to say I'm sorry. That will be a great way to help solidify this into your muscle memory. And then you can also practice with these other things. But I would start with starting first with excuse me, and then do the other ones. Because here's the reason. Yes, you could have all of these in your toolbox, and I hope that you do hold on to them. But sometimes our brain doesn't know what to do if things are complicated. It doesn't know which direction to take. Oh, is this time I say, excuse me? Is this the time that I say the other thing Karen said? Is this the time that I say the other thing? And then our brain defaults to what's easiest, which is, I'm sorry, if that is, in fact, the habit that we have established. And for most of us, it is. That's number one, excuse me. Number two is a version of thank you. Thank you for understanding that I was late. Thank you for your patience. And frankly, you don't even need to say that I was late, unless it, again, is something where you held up the meeting. But saying thank you for understanding, that is plenty. Thank you for your patience. This can also apply in email. We have this weird societal expectation now that people think instant gratification is what's expected. And when we know that, and how we've established that through habit and things around us, just again, a societal context, then we feel like we need to apologize when we're 24 hours later, or even sometimes hours later. I remember somebody who emailed me. I had emailed her early in the morning because I wanted an answer for something, but I didn't necessarily need it that day. So think about it. I wrote her an email at 7, and then that afternoon, she profusely apologized in the email. And I'm thinking, you don't need to apologize. It's the same day, for goodness sakes. No problem. But we've got to think about it from our perspective, because obviously the one thing that we are in control of is ourself and our response. So being mindful of how you want to respond, whether it's email, whether it's coming late to a meeting, whether you have distractions going on in the background. And here's the other thing. Half the time, people don't even notice. For example, I have seen multiple people on Zoom calls say, I'm so sorry about the background noise. Oh, they're hammering next door. I'm so sorry about this. And okay, every once in a while, if it's really obvious, you can hear it. And sometimes I care, or it matters at the acknowledgement. Sometimes, frankly, I don't. You can decide for yourself. But keep in mind that many times you might not need to acknowledge the thing that you feel is disruptive, that you feel is so noisy that they might not even be able to hear it. And if you really want to check it out, instead of apologizing for it, ask them, hey, do you hear that construction going on in the background? Okay, good. Let's move on. You don't want to ruminate on it. Get to the point of the meeting and move things along. The next one is a version of number 2, but it's starting with I appreciate. It's simply a different language for it. I appreciate you waiting for me. I appreciate that you waited for me to pipe in here, or I appreciated that you did start without me. Maybe you want to say that. Whatever it is that you appreciate is another nice way of bringing it in, acknowledging that you weren't there right away, but also being able to say it and get that out there. So once again, excuse me, thank you for understanding, and I appreciate your patience. Any version of those will do. And the most fun one that I want to bring up, that is from my friend Jay Manning, who mentioned this years ago, and I thought, this is hilarious. She said, what if instead of our default excuse me or thank you or I appreciate, we trained ourselves to say, I'm sexy instead? I love it. I think that is such a great way to do it. So if you want to use that as a bonus response, please do. All that I want to say is use good judgment and discernment based on the crowd that you're with. But that can be a great one to laugh and have a good time with. And also, it's a great affirmation. Who doesn't want to feel sexy? So why not say it anyway? Just be careful where you say it. All right, folks. Thank you for listening. I am on, where am I? I am here available to you, and I would love to answer any questions that you might have or any challenging scenarios. Please let me know what challenging scenarios you have that you're facing from a communication standpoint, because I would love to hear them and I would love to use those on one of the podcast episodes. Until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, morning, night, whatever it is in your part of the world. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.